Hello viewers, I am going to deliver a series of lectures on history of literature, history of English criticism and some great works of literature, basically to help out students of the undergraduate, postgraduate and uh, people who are uh, preparing for competitive exams like the NET or the SET. Our regular paper reading sessions will continue as well. Today, we are going to take up the Elizabethan age and I'm going to focus mainly on the poets of the Elizabethan period. It's going to be part 1 of my lecture. In the next session, we are going to round up this topic and move on to some other age. I may not follow the chronological order. So let's begin our journey today. So we all know that the Renaissance in England began with, or rather during the reign of King Henry VII. And the effect of Renaissance uh, were twofold. It had an effect on life and literature. It also had an effect on religion. Now, in the Middle Ages, we know that everything was under the unchallenged sway of the Roman Catholic Church, and the Church had declared man to be a born sinner. It said that man had descended from the sinful Adam, and therefore the only duty of man was to practice renunciation of the sinful pleasures of life, as that was the only means to salvation. And this particular world had no value for man. This was only an opportunity given to him to prepare for the world to come. All learning was under the monopoly of the church, and anything that was not under the monopoly was supposed to be false or worthless. In religion, its head was the Pope, and Pope represented Christ himself, and he held key to the kingdom of heaven. Now we know that in 1453, Constantinople was attacked by the Turks and Constantinople fell. And with the fall of Constantinople uh, and the flight of the scholars there, the Greek and the Latin classics, the ancient Greek and Latin classics, uh, gradually, uh, spread in the various countries of West Europe. So, and then a gradual revolution obviously took place, and the study of ancient and Greek classics uh, engendered a spirit of free inquiry. It's true that even in the Greek classics, suppose if we take up a work like Oedipus, it's true that there was this element of fatalism, there was this element of destiny. But at the same time, please don't forget that we had people like Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, and also, if you talk about the plays of Sophocles or Euripides or Aeschylus. Now, in all their works, I think there has been a great celebration of the human spirit. There's been a great celebration of the human entity, and this is something really affected the perspectives of the people of the European nations, because this really helped them to come out of the shackles of a church that had total monopoly on all kinds of learning. So the reading of these classics liberated the people, and they began to indulge in free inquiry. They began to ask questions logically. They began to exercise their intellectual faculty, and this is something which we call humanism. So now the church was no longer the center of the world, of the universe. God and destiny was not the center of the universe. Man became the center of the universe. So now, if a man would really rise to the heights of angel, or if you'd fall to the depths of a devil, the onus of that entire rise or that fall, the responsibility of that rise or that fall would be on man himself. It would be the product of his choice. So a man would decide his own destiny. So his character would really lead him to act in a certain way, and his actions in turn would determine what he would be in the long run. So this is known as humanism. So this was the impact of Renaissance on art and literature and on life. Similarly, in the field of religion, um, the Catholic Church was questioned, the Catholic Church was purified, the Catholic Church was obviously, in many ways, it was changed by a movement called the Protestant movement. So, Reformation was something that took place along with humanism, and Reformation was a movement that hastened the establishment of the Protestant Church. Now, long before Queen Elizabeth I had ascended the throne, the Parliament, at the instance of her father, Henry VIII, had declared the English Church independent of the Pope, making the King and his successors its heads and defenders of the faith. Elizabeth inherited this tradition, but the defeat of the Spanish Armada, that had long posed a threat to the security of England, another external obstacle to its progress was removed. Its navy was left the sole master of the seas, facilitating the extension of trade and also the establishment of colonies abroad. And by a series of economic laws, the poor were also put on the road to prosperity. So, whenever a nation is gifted with prosperity and abundance, there is a lot of leisure, and this sense of security really helps people to indulge in intellectual activities, and that maybe was the reason, with the blessings of peace and prosperity and the enlightened patronage of the Queen, uh, this particular age saw an unprecedented, outburst of literary activity, particularly in the fields of drama, poetry, and criticism. We know that 1603 once again marked a juncture. Queen Elizabeth died, and she had no children of her own because she never married, and she was succeeded by King James I, and that began the Jacobean age. And uh, everything changed in the Jacobean age because King James I was not an able administrator. He was not able to follow Queen Elizabeth I, in her footsteps, and he reversed the good measures taken by the Queen by his repressive rule and his heavy taxes. But even during the Jacobean era, we will come across a lot of literary output because many writers had begun their career in the Elizabethan age and they continued to pour out their creative talents through literature in the years following the death of Queen Elizabeth I. Now, several kinds of verse forms were attempted in this age. You had the epic romance, the pastoral, the verse tale, the elegy, the sonnet, the lyric, the satire. But largely, it was an age of the sonnet, the lyric, and the satire. So, we are going to focus on these three. And before we really move on to a discussion of sonnet, lyric, and satire, I would also talk about the anthologies. Uh, Poetry was very popular during this time, during this age, and for the first time, poetry began to be published in anthologies. And the fashion was set by what has come to be called after the name of its printer, Tottel's Miscellany. Tottel, Tottel's Miscellany. It was published in 1557. It contains it contained the songs and sonnets of several authors, of whom Wyatt and Surrey are the chief. So, primarily Wyatt and Surrey contributed in Tottel's Miscellany. And this anthology was followed 20 years later by a host of other collections, of which England's Helicon, published in 1600. This one offered the richest fare, because you had poets like Sidney, Spenser, Drayton, Lodge, Green, Peele, Shakespeare, all contributing in this particular anthology. The poems included in these collections were largely songs or lyrics and sonnets. Now, here I must make one thing clear. A sonnet is a lyric, but all lyrics are not sonnets. So, therefore, we have here we have really included separate slot for the sonnet, because what is a lyric basically? Undoubtedly, a musical composition that is essentially subjective, that is essentially carrying a personal note. Uh, you know, so a sonnet is a special kind of a lyric. So, we are having an umbrella term lyric and also a subcategory, a special form of lyric called the sonnet. And we begin with the sonnet. We know that the sonnet was introduced into England by Sir Thomas Wyatt and Henry Howard. Who was Henry Howard? He was the Earl of Surrey. And this was done in the first half of the 16th century. And Wyatt more or less followed the Petrarchan model of writing. We know what is the Petrarchan model of writing. A sonnet has 14 lines, and Petrarch always divided 14 lines into two sections. One was called the octave, the other was called the sestet. Octave has 8 lines and sestet has 6 lines. But Surrey changed the form. He brought in 3 quatrains and a couplet. And this is also called the English sonnet. And the English sonnet became very, very popular. It was later followed by poets like Shakespeare. And this particular form of English sonnet that was introduced by Surrey, now this particular form has 3 quatrains in an alternate rhyme. So, it has an alternate rhyme pattern and also a concluding couplet, 2 lines that rhyme with each other. Okay. Now, Petrarch had a beloved called Laura, and he had written, a series or a sequence of sonnets, all dedicated to Laura. Now, this style was followed by most of the Elizabethan sonneteers, because they also preferred to write in sequences or connected series, and they would always address the sonnets. Mainly, they would address most of the sonnets to some lady, and that lady could be either a supposed lady or a real lady. There are exceptions, but most of the sonnets are addressed to ladies. So, therefore, love was their subject, and there were certain sonneteers who were writing sonnets to win the favor of their patrons. And these sonneteers would follow certain rigid conventions. And the moment you read their sonnets, you would realize there is a tinge of artificiality in their productions, because they had no real beloved, and they were concocting an entire situation just for the sake of their survival in the patron's court, maybe. Um, the lady would always be heartless, and the lover would be ever languishing for her sake, and sometimes he would even reach the point of death. So, this would be the general pattern of sonnet writing. But there are sonnets, that are inspired by genuine love. So, when you come across such sonnets, you can really feel that how the sonneteer has used sonnet writing as a kind of a key to unlock his heart. There are a few sonnets that are written on other subjects. It can be on sweet content, it can be on sleep, it can be on some religious contemplation. We know that sonnet originally came from Italy, but there were also French practitioners. You had poets like Ronsard and also Desport, Ronsard, Ronsard, and also Desport, Desportes. They were French practitioners of this particular genre of writing, and they also inspired many Elizabethan sonneteers. In sonnets, you find a beautiful blending of the content and the construct. The words used and the meter used, they are beautifully in harmony, and that really gives rise to a very rich verse that is both musical and that is both enriched with a content, a very impressive kind of content. Now, we come now to the second important term, the lyric. Just now I told you, whenever I say lyric, I mean something that is subjective and something that is also very, very musical. But interestingly, the lyric was borrowed from continental sources: Greek, Latin, Italian, and French. And it took roots in English soil because it catered to the people's growing interest in music. Queen Elizabeth herself was a lover of music, and she played on the virginals. It was a kind of a stringed instrument. And among the people, there were not only distinguished musicians but a regular class of professional singers who performed in streets, taverns, and other places. The lyric, therefore, soon found its way into the drama, uh, and it was sung for the entertainment of the audience. A sufficiently large number of lyrics written in this age are of this nature. Sometimes, however, they were written independently and sometimes even inserted in prose pamphlets. Um, Now they were not really very heavy kind of stuff. They express a kind of a holiday mood of the writer. The lyrics, particularly the lyrics which are inserted in plays, they are of this kind. The subjects varied. It could be love, it could be court life, it could be nature, it could be morality, it could be dress, it could be death. And sometimes, the same subject is treated differently by different poets. They are generally impersonal, saying not what the writer thinks or feels, but what is common experience. Even when the lyric is written in the first person, it is every man speaking and not the poet. This sometimes makes his treatment to the subject conventional, rather an exercise in writing in the fashion of the day than communication of a genuinely felt experience. Uh, this is where I stop, and I want to discuss this. Now, if you look at the definition of a lyric in any dictionary, you'll find that subjectivity is a very important element of lyric writing. But initially, when you are looking at lyric writing in the Elizabethan age, you will find that uh, of the two qualities that are important in lyric writing, one was subjectivity and the other was musicality. The Elizabethans mainly they stressed on the musicality, not on the subjectivity, because lyrics of this kind, lyrics that were uh, impersonal yet musical, these lyrics were written by classical writers, Greek writers, Latin writers. Now, gradually later on, the form of the lyric would change. The lyric would be not only musical but also subjective. But when we talk about Elizabethan lyric, then primarily it is the element of music that is stressed on and not subjectivity, because we know that the Greek writers, they were basically impersonal writers. They never really indulged in uh, any kind of subjectivity, and that's the main difference between the romantic method of writing and the classical method of writing. It is true that the Elizabethan age proper is the first romantic age in the history of English literature, but there was a sufficient amount of Greek and Latin influence at the beginning of this age. But this would really undergo a kind of transformation. They would take a lot from you know, the classical thinkers. They would primarily take the element of individuality, primarily take the element of the celebration of human spirit, but they would also add to it the element of subjectivity, and uh, they would not really love impersonality. They would love an expression of personality through poetry during the Elizabethan age. This transformation would really come in a bit later. Initially, when they were blindly following the classical tradition, they would mainly talk about nature, they would talk about many other aspects, but they would really do it in an impersonal manner. And there is where sonnet writing differs. Though sonnet writing also has its origin in Italy, uh, but sonnet writing is not at all impersonal. Sonnets are musical and therefore they are lyrics, even in the Elizabethan sense. But they are different from lyrics in the Elizabethan sense because they are subjective as well, despite having their origin in Italy. It's not ancient Italy, it's the Italy of the Petrarchan times, the Italy of the times of Wyatt and Surrey. So, even there, transformations were taking place in literary perspectives. So, in language and versification, no better lyrics have since been written in English literature. The best lyrics are found in the Elizabethan age. Um, it is obviously they are very spontaneous, they are light, and they are maybe they are not having the passion present in a sonnet, but there is something in lyric, that really had won the favor of the audience, not only in the Elizabethan age but also in the ages that were to follow. Now we come to the third category, which is called the satire. Um, as you've seen in the Middle Ages, anticipations of the satire occur in the Middle English poetry. You have that, I think, in Chaucer himself. And in the 15th century, if someone had given it a proper form, then that was Skelton, Skelton. Uh, it is basically a Roman form and it came to England only after the Renaissance. There was an anticipation of satire. Proper satire was written only after the Renaissance. And the satire, it mainly thrives upon abuses that can be social or individual. Now, as this glorious period left little to desire, the very raw material of which the satire is made was wanting. Because, people were mainly happy with all that was happening around them. So, it was not really the proper period for the satire to flourish. If the satire really has to flourish, you need to have a lot of uh, loopholes, lackings in your environment. The form is there. It was fresh from the Renaissance. It was borrowed once again from the classical masters. Um, but the indignation uh, that should really arise from dissatisfaction, that is lacking. So the satire of Elizabethan age lacks force, um, and also sincerity of purpose. Mainly, the satire that you find in Elizabethan age is modeled upon juvenal, Juvenal. It's very coarse, it's very abusive at times, um, but when it is modeled upon Horace, it shows better taste. So there were mainly two masters, of satire, Juvenal and Horace. And the subjects of satire would mainly be the courtier and the court life, the Puritan, the woman, the corrupt priests, the dishonest tailor, the Englishman who aped the French or the Italian fashions. Um, and when satires were written, the heroic couplet was preferred to other stanza forms. Uh, and as I told you, that satire will really develop in the 17th and 18th centuries, and it lacks force. I told you just now, it lacks force in the Elizabethan age. Okay. Now, before we round up today's session, I will really take up each of these, genres in our forthcoming session. I would like to tell you a little bit about the main sonneteers. there were three main sonneteers, though I'll be naming a few more: Sir Philip Sidney, uh, Edmund Spenser, and William Shakespeare. So, I'll be telling you a little bit about Sir Philip Sidney. Now, he is known for writing uh, a sequence or a series of 108 sonnets. And what is the series called? Astrophel and Stella. What is the meaning of the term Astrophel? Star lover. And what is the meaning of the term Stella? Star. Who is the star lover? The lover. And who is the Stella? The beloved. So, this particular sonnet sequence called Astrophel and Stella commemorates his fruitless love for Penelope Devereux. Penelope Devereux, Devereux. Who was Penelope Devereux? Daughter of his patron, the Earl of Essex. Uh, Now, to this particular series of sonnets, he also added 11 songs or lyrics. Now, just now we discussed the essential difference between lyrics and sonnets, especially in the Elizabethan age. Um, as we have discussed just now, that some people wrote sonnets in the Elizabethan age mainly because it was a fashion to do so, and there were others who really wrote sonnets to to give vent to their deeply felt emotions for their real beloveds. Now, Sidney's sonnets were inspired by a lady whom he loved and whom he lost. So, it is true that though the poems are autobiographical, it's not purely an autobiography, because there's a lot of fancy at times, imagination replacing, fact. And these, fits of imagination at times can detract, from the real chapter of Sidney's life. Now, if you look at the form, they are written mostly in mixed Italian and English forms. The octave is always Italian, while the rest is English. What was the rhyming pattern? A, B, B, A, A, B, B, A. This is the typical Petrarchan, pattern, A, B, B, A, B, B, A of the octave section. Now look at the rest of the 6 lines. C, D, C, D, E, E. C, D, C, D forms a quatrain in alternating rhyming pattern. C, C, D, D, alternate C, D, C, D. And E, E forms a couplet. So the octave is in the Petrarchan form. The sestate is in the English form. You don't have a sestate here. The rest of 6 lines is in the English form. And there are some sonnets written by Philip Sidney that are entirely English in their form. So, on the whole, these sonnets are charmingly written and they really attain a very high standard. And as a sonneteer, Sidney is ranked only next to Shakespeare and Spenser. There are beautiful sonnets written by Sidney, like Loving in Truth and Fain in Verse, My Love to Show. A beautiful sonnet with How sad steps, O moon, thou climbest the skies. As I told you, there were some sonnets written on other topics. You have here one, Come sleep, O sleep, the certain knot of peace. Okay. The next sonneteer, of course, we should have an entire session on him, Edmund Spenser, and surely we will, because we need to discuss Fairy Queen. But we will talk only about Spenser as a sonneteer in this session. Now, his sequence of 88 sonnets was called Amoretti. And what is the meaning of Amoretti? Love songs. Now, this particular sequence tells of his love for Elizabeth Boyle, Elizabeth Boyle, Boyle, whom he married in 1594, a year before its publication. He once again has attached 4 hymns, and these 4 hymns, they followed the sonnet sequence, and in some of the editions you find them along with the sonnet sequence. Um, the love that is unfolding in Amorete is not much for the physical charm of the lady as for her divine qualities. The deification of the lady begins primarily with Spenser. In the 61st sonnet, she is a glorious image of the Maker's beauty. In the 87th sonnet, she is an earthly manifestation of the heavenly ray. So, Spenser is gradually, placing the beloved on an altar. She is becoming a divine, an embodiment of divine grace. And this process will be taken to an extreme by the sonneteers who will follow the Spenserian school of, you know, thought. If we come to the form, undoubtedly he followed the English form, but he brought in a few innovations. They are written in 3 interlinked quatrains. Now, what is an interlinked quatrain? AB, AB, BC, BC, CD, CD, EE. So, if you have 3 stanzas of 4 lines each, you find a kind of a linking. AB, AB, see the B is taken forward, BC, BC, the C is taken forward, CD, CD, and finally EE. So, generally in an English sonnet, the one that was, uh, designed by Earl of Surrey, you had independent rhymes in the quatrains: AB, AB, CD, CD, EF, EF, GG. But here you have a kind of an interlinking. Okay. Uh, but once again, in case of Spenser, the love is genuine. Uh, and he also indulges in flights of fancy, in conceits, in very, very elaborate kind of imagery. There's a beauty of language, there's a richness of melody, um, and Petrarch and also Depots, they all influenced Spenser, and he is the second greatest sonneteer after Shakespeare. His best written sonnets include "Like as a ship that threw the sonnet wide," or "Most glorious Lord of life that on this day," or "Fresh spring the herald of love's mighty king," or "One day I wrote her name upon the strand," or "Men call you fair and you do credit it." We should also mention Henry Constable in passing, and he is known for his sequence Diana.